Welcome to Win Your Case, Creating a Persuasive Thesis. This is David, and I am an online writing center coach for Southern New Hampshire University, and we've done a series of live workshops that we've also made into recordings, and that's what brings you here for the recording. So just to keep in mind that all of our workshops are done live as well, but then to give you as many resources and convenience as possible, we also record them. So this is what this is. So this is going to be the material without the group interaction. But hopefully, if you want some more information about that, you can feel free to contact one of our coaches. And feel free to try out one of the live one-on-one workshops as well too. So it's always a good idea, I think, to maybe repeat a topic, to go back to it again after you've already heard a little bit about what's going on, and then you can come at it with some prior knowledge, and that can really be a powerful thing to improve your writing. But this is specifically looking at creating a persuasive thesis statement, which is actually going to enable you to write a complete essay with a strong argument. So we call this Win Your Case, Creating a Persuasive Thesis. We're going to move on to the next one. So in this workshop, we will discuss the steps to developing a strong persuasive thesis, and we will apply these steps to a 10-point checklist to help you structure and develop a persuasive essay. So it's going to be in two parts. The first part is going to really just hone in on the thesis statement itself, and then we're going to look through the steps afterwards to see how you can start thinking about and structuring your entire paper. Now, this does specifically apply to the persuasive essay, English 123. However, what we try to do with all of these workshops is try to make them as universal as possible. So basically, the things that we're saying about thesis statements as a whole, would really apply for just about anything. Even though we're looking specifically at this type of a thesis statement too, the idea of narrowing a topic down, breaking it up, and really seeing what your argument is applicable to all types of writing. So if you're here and you're not part of that class, you'll still be able to get something out of this, I'm sure, but just by looking at the whole process in its entirety. Okay, so we have a little arrow here that's going to explore the steps to a strong thesis here. We basically begin with determining the topic, choosing a question, answering the question, selecting evidence to support the answer, and writing the thesis. We'll go through this one by one here. Okay. First thing, determining the topic, and that's always going to be a commitment. So a lot of this beginning stage has to kind of be explored and completed at this stage. So you're coming to this workshop maybe with an idea of what it is that you're doing, or you might even actually be at a further end of the process. But the whole point is that your topic, you want to make sure that it is does create a strong argument, and that it is persuasive in nature. Okay, this is going to be reinforced a little bit later too. But this topic is typically on the controversial side, and what I mean by that too is there's usually very strong opposing viewpoints, and you're going to take one stance, with the realization that there's a really strong opposite stance that goes along with that. Okay, so you're going to be determining that, choosing a question. Okay, a question is kind of like, well, what is it that you're trying to answer all the way through? That question is going to help you develop your entire thesis statement. Okay. So let's take a look at the question at hand. I'm actually using a topic here, so for a case in point. So what you can do is really apply your specific topic to the examples that I'm giving, and I think it will apply. The good news about this type of writing is there's something very pragmatic about it. There's something very almost formulaic. Even though what you say is going to be very unique, there's a very specific way that you do these types of essays. And I think that once you understand that structure, then it'll make it a lot easier to be more powerful in terms of what you're saying about the subject or the topic. But I'm going to be using video games and learning styles which, as we probably all know, is a pretty controversial topic in terms of, some people, are insistent that video games are kind of mindless entertainment, and they can actually, in some cases, be dangerous in terms of conditioning and all that stuff. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we can say that it's really strong for learning styles, that the actual skills themselves. So that's why I'm using this topic, because first of all, it's something that does have an extreme side, and I'm going to be in the support for it as we go for it. And it's interesting, and just to give you a little bit of a backstory, the reason why I've chosen this is that over the years, I've never been a video game person, but my son has become one, and my wife and I homeschool him. And we've really found out that in addition to, the work that we do with him, that the video gaming skills has actually really enhanced a lot of the common learning process, which was a complete surprise to me. So in some cases, the topic that you choose, you might at one point come from it at another angle at one point, but then, through education and through different ideas, you might come at it at a completely new angle. So maybe think about that too. Have you ever changed your mind on something? Those can be very powerful persuasive topics, because you've already encountered the other side, but then now you're coming at it from both sides. So you will really be a strong advocate and authority on the subject, versus maybe just never looking at that other side. That's why we have counter arguments in this type of writing too, which we'll talk about too. But anyway, let's take a look at, what I'm doing. So how and why questions are always good to start. The whole idea of context questions in general would include, the who, what, where, why, and how. That's always a good place to kind of cover. But in this case, I'll choose how and why questions to help me start narrowing it down. So video games and learning styles, I've decided that that's what I want to do. So some of my questions would be things like, how does video game affect visual learning skills? How does it affect oral learning skills? How does it affect kinesthetic learning skills? And then why? Why does playing video games affect visual, oral, and kinesthetic learning skills? Okay, so what I've done, you might be like, well, how did I come up with those specific answers? We're going to kind of theoretically say that I've spent time researching. Okay, decided that I wanted to do more researching, and then after a bunch of researching, I found what are called trends. We talk about this in some of our other workshops when we talk about research skills. But when you do your research, you're going to be reading articles and reading parts of books and introductions to books, all this research. And, on one level, it can get overwhelming. You're like, well, where do I start? Where do I begin? Begin by trends. So I was going to say, with this process right now, too, as I kept reading about video games and learning styles, I came up, with the actual learning styles, that are related to, like, cognitive learning and all of that. So, we have visual learning, we've got oral, which is the listening, okay, and then we've got the kinesthetic, which is just three of the main work, the hands-on type of learning. And to me, visual, oral, and kinesthetic, they all go hand in hand with this type of learning, and they can really enhance it. So at this stage, what I've been doing is I've been researching it, and then now I've narrowed it down to specific questions that I want to answer. Because when you think about it, that's what your thesis ultimately is going to do. You're going to take a big topic, no matter what it is. So think about what your actual subject is. I'll even go bigger than that. The subject is broad. The idea of learning styles is broad. The idea of capital punishment, legalization of marijuana. I'm trying to give some of the more common ones. Sometimes they're overdone too, but sometimes there's still a lot to be written about them. But there, euthanasia, the right to die, things like that, things that are controversial, and people take very strong stances on them, and can even actually be related to something you're passionate about, with like music or art. And should certain things be, be done as a film person, a real lover of film. I have a problem with the colorization of old movies. I think it really ruins the original art. Some people find it enhances it. Without going into the details of that here and there, it's a good topic because of that. Because I feel strongly about one end, and somebody else feels strongly about the other end. Okay, so those are the types of things that you want to be thinking about as you're researching and moving closer and closer to the thesis statement. Okay, so my question ultimately that I'm going to form this is, well, how can video games strengthen learning skills? So ultimately, I've come up with that too. I know we've skipped a lot of steps because it's the research process, is a requirement, but the thesis statement can come from your research. Okay, you ultimately want it to be your thesis statement, but it will come from the development of it, you putting ideas together, like I said before, looking at trends and that type of stuff. Okay. So, you're answering the questions and then you're selecting evidence to support the answer. Okay, as we progress and I talk about the structure of the essay itself, we're going to kind of get a good idea, some ideas of where you can integrate your sources. Okay, ultimately that's going to get you to write your thesis. Okay, so in this kind of visual aid here, what I've done here is I've taken a look at a thesis statement, how you can break it up, and just look at it visually, using these patterns here. So the assignment itself, the very first thing, is an argumentative research essay, persuasive in nature. Okay, again, if you're in the English 123 course, that's what you're specifically doing. But in other cases, you can have other subjects where you're meant to do an argument paper, and an argument is there for you to talk about what your thoughts are, but then also look at what the counter arguments. The topic is going to be video games and learning via UDL. Now, what is UDL is universal design learning. It's a very specific type of learning that kind of brings in a lot of different disciplines. So you might be like, well, where did I get that topic? Once again, imagine we're all doing research together, and the subjects that keep coming up and the ideas that keep coming up, and even what I'm interested in. I could already have been interested in this part of learning and then finding a way to make it combine and work out in this topic. So I had an interest in that, and then now I'm saying, all right, well, video games and learning. Okay, that's the topic. Now the question is going to be, how can playing video games improve learning styles through UDL? Now that's very specific. The big topic is video games and learning. You can find lots of very general research about that too. But for a paper like this, you're actually coming right out and very specifically saying something. Now, what we've done here is I've broken this up and I've actually given you a thesis statement to look at. Okay, if you go back and even look at the rubric is asking you to have claims with your thesis. This will help explain that. So here's my thesis statement that would go at the end of my first paragraph. Okay, so educators and parents should integrate video games into the model of universal design learning, UDL, because studies prove that playing them collectively strengthens visual, oral, and kinesthetic learning styles. So that's all one sentence, but look how much information is in there. Okay, it's starting off, if we break it up to the first part, it's saying educators and parents should integrate video games. Okay, key words are very significant for that. Things like should or need are really, really good words to have in there too, because it's setting up the assertiveness of your study. Okay, so without those types of words, it's not as assertive. Okay, we should start doing something, we should stop doing something. We need to do something, we need to stop doing something. So need and should are good words to have in there. So again, think about your own topic and how that might apply. So educators and parents should integrate games into the universal design learning, because it's a nice little key word there too, because the because is going ahead and answering it very succinctly. And the answer is going to lie in the claims that you're going to support in your paper. Because studies prove that playing them collectively strengthens visual, number 1, oral, number 2, and kinesthetic, number 3, learning styles. So imagine the essay where you would begin in the opening paragraph, you talk about learning styles, you talk about video games as a whole. You might include 1 or 2 sources that might set a foundation for this type of learning. Okay, it's always a good idea to start big, paint a big picture, get an overview, and then narrow it down, almost like funnel it down to that thesis statement right at the very end of the first paragraph. Now this would be the sentence that would be at the end of the first paragraph. Now thesis statements, yes, they can go a number of different places. They can go in the very first sentence, sometimes they can go at the very end, although it's rare, depending on how it is. or they can go at the end of a first paragraph. I like to look at that model, and especially if you're not really familiar or comfortable with doing a lot of extensive writing. I would say stick to this model for now, and then eventually you can branch out. But the thesis, or the rubric actually, I'm pretty sure asks you to put it right there too at the end of the first paragraph. So it's a good structure to work with. Okay, so again, this is the last sentence, and then in a lot of ways this becomes the most important sentence that you have to come up with. That's why we're spending so much time on it. And then you end up in the body of your essay tackling each one. So you'll have a bunch of paragraphs that talk about the visual learning and all the support that goes along with that. Then you make transition, and then you go into the oral learning, and then you'll go into the kinesthetic learning. Okay, so it's almost like you'll have three separate sections, which constitutes the body of your paper, which is a bulk of your paper, like the most of it. Okay, and along the way too, you want to have a counter argument in it. We'll talk about that more later as we progress. But all good persuasive papers do need a counter argument. You need to look at that other side. What is informing the opposition, the opposite of what you're trying to say? It might be a direct opposition, or it might be something that actually informs the other side one way or the other. But in whatever way, you need to include that, and then you also need to see how that's going to strengthen what it is that you're writing. Okay. Now, I know we're just talking about thesis statements, and I'm talking about all this other stuff. It's because this is really the root of it. Okay, so this is trying to get you to understand this is how you write the thesis statement, but in the overall big picture, this is where you're going to use the thesis statement. Okay. Now, in this next section, let's apply this to your persuasive essay in 10 steps. Okay, so the next 10 slides here are going to be strategies that you can think about and use it as a checklist too. I think this will make a really nice checklist as you go through and look at this one by one. Okay. Okay, I'm going to call these win your case, and it'll be numbers 1 through 10. So win your case number 1 says, make sure your topic is debatable and has 2 strong opposing sides that can be argued on both sides. The more controversial, the better. Okay, so this is the very first thing. Like I've been saying all along too, the topic itself really needs to lend itself to this sort of drama, so to speak. And I think a lot of times people have a hard time writing these papers. It's just because the argument is not strong enough. So once again, you want to come right in and say, we should start doing this because of this, this, and this. And that becomes the foundation of what you're talking about. Okay, when your case number 2, take a very specific stance on one side and be able to support the side with existing research from reliable sources. Reliable sources, the Shapiro Library database, published books, published articles, published journals, that type of stuff. Okay, I know that this isn't a workshop on research, but hopefully at this stage right now, you can understand that reliable sources are really reliant on making this successful. Okay, avoid Wikipedia, for instance. Never use Wikipedia as an actual source. By the way, Wikipedia is great if you want to go to the end and look at the sources at the end of a Wikipedia page. Those are legitimate sources that you might be able to find and use. Next, include a counter-argument so that you can address it and refute any part of it as needed. Like I've been saying all along. So you're talking about the legalization of marijuana, and you're saying we need to legalize it for medicinal purposes. A counter-argument comes in, and then some medical scholar, doctor has come in and basically say, here are the dangers of marijuana. But then what you ultimately want to do is take that other side and kind of show how your side is stronger. That's what becomes kind of like, the necessary part of writing this type of a paper. Okay, so your counter argument, you don't want it to be so strong that it's going to overcome your topic. Okay, what you're doing is you're addressing the other side. You're acknowledging that there is another side of it, but you're saying, look, I acknowledge there's another side, but here's why everybody should listen to my side. Okay, that might be true on this side with marijuana, but look at all the benefits that it's causing over here too. that might very well outweigh what this negative. So it's really important what you choose for that counter argument. But what you're doing is you're becoming more well-rounded. It's like, and this is nothing, nothing more than like the qualities of good debate. It's that idea of always be aware of what it is. There's an ancient rhetoric principle known as topoi, topos and the topoi, which are ultimately, when you're in debate mode, you are ready for anything. So when you're really an advocate for something, there are no surprises. You're ready for someone to say, yeah, but what about this over here? Politicians do it. We see them in debates. So be ready. So really kind of get a really extreme sense of like what someone would. And, think about any controversial topic, from capital punishment to abortion, or, right to life, or pro-choice, that type of stuff. Pro-life, pro-choice. Anything that can stir something up from any capacity. Then you want to be able to be like, all right, well, if I'm pro choice here, for instance, what are the pro-lifers going to say? What am I going to be ready for? If I'm pro-life, what are the pro-choice people going to say? That type of stuff. So you've got to really kind of be aware of that. A good place to have a counter-argument might be right at the end of your body, right before the conclusion. Okay, you could also integrate it into the paper too. A counter-argument can really go anywhere. You can actually start with a counter-argument. Hey, look at this idea and let's prove this wrong. Okay, if you don't feel comfortable with that sort of writing, which is a little bit more on the sophisticated side, kind of just go through the guide and just do it in a very step-by-step way. Prove your point, have the body of your essay, and then have your counter-argument right at the end, before the conclusion. Okay. When your case number 3, create a voice, style, or tone that can engage the reader. A good persuasive essay is not unlike a good persuasive speech. When you write, speak out loud, talk out loud. Imagine what your writing is going to be delivered in front of a group of people. And who might those people be? In this case, with the example that I've used with video games, I've actually talked about, parents and teachers. They really need to stand up and listen to what I'm saying. So even though when you write an essay like this, you're really writing it for just about anybody who's interested in it, if you target an audience, you don't even necessarily have to come out and say it. But if you kind of almost imagine who would be listening to what I have to say, and then who also might be opposing me in this, where would I be? Then the actual words, phrases, and ideas are going to come out in this sort of speech mentality, and it's going to make the writing itself more engaging. Okay, so keep that in mind as a tactic. A good speech and a good essay are kind of hand in hand. They go one. So that's what you're doing. You're writing a speech, without all the speech introductions and salutations, conclusions and all that. Okay, so write it with the intention that it's meant to be said out loud. Okay, and this goes to when your case number 4. Develop a very specific thesis that you can prove throughout the essay in well-developed paragraphs. Try to aim for 3 specific sections so you can create a framework. Okay, we've talked about that. We've already looked at an example. And in when your case number 5, this is just a reiteration of the example that we talked about earlier. So here's an example of a persuasive thesis with researchable 3 claims. Video games should be taught to adolescents because there is clear evidence that it improves kinesthetic, visual, and auditory learning skills. Okay, notice I've underlined the should. That's the assertive nature because we're in a persuasive argument mode. Should be done what? Okay, and why? Because there is evidence that it improves 1, kinesthetic, 2, visual, 3, auditory learning skills. And then now you've got the framework for this. What this also helps you do is really narrow down your research. So now that we're looking at learning skills and we've even broken it down to 3 specific things, you can actually say, all right, well now, if it doesn't have to do with these types of claims, then you don't necessarily have to use them. So kinesthetic, so you might have 1 or 2 sources in your paper that deal with kinesthetic learning, 1 or 2 sources that might deal with visual, 1 or 2 sources that might deal with auditory learning skills. We're in your case number 6. Okay, now in the next 3 slides, I'm going through the whole process of the structure of the paper. Introduction, body, and conclusion. So in your introduction, include a broad overview of the subject, include a hook or an engaging anecdote, really important for a persuasive paper. Then narrow it down to your thesis statement at the end of the paragraph. And I have research. You might want 1 or 2 sources, in this section. Okay, this is giving you an idea of where you might want to. Okay, you don't want this paper to actually be a cutting and pasting of research. You just want the sources to be at the right places. In each major section, you might want to have a source. But then ultimately, this is your study. So again, the introduction, a good anecdote or a question, starting off with a question. What would it be like if all adolescents were able to truly show their educational promise? Okay, and then you're just kind of starting off with a hook or an idea, getting the reader to think, or starting off with a story or an anecdote. Here's an example, a success story of the adolescent that was doing video games, and then go right into the thesis. Okay, so paint it big, maybe give a little bit of a story, some research might be good, some history, historical context, and then go right to the specifics. Then the body paragraphs, in your case number 7, develop your thesis paragraph by paragraph with research covering each claim. You might have 3 sections from the thesis to support it. In this case, you want 3, if you're doing specifically the English 123 course. But 3 is always a good number anyways. I like 3s. 3s you can do a lot with. You're being something specific, but then you're taking it specific and breaking it down yet again into 3 things, and then you can actually hit each one, and then now you've got a focused idea. Okay, so this is going to be the bulk of your essay. Okay, 3 sections, so you could very well be writing, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs per claim. Conclusion. Number 8, what are you doing? You're revisiting the thesis without being repetitive. You want to offer solutions in this last section. And I have in parentheses research. You might include a source, you might not. It really depends. But if you're thinking about the integration of sources, you might have something at the introduction to enhance the overview. You might have 1 or 2 sources in each claim. So let's just say for the sake of argument you have 1 claim. And then your counter-argument will also be a separate one that you'll have too. So in that case you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if what's 1 in the introduction, 3 in the body, 4 will make an additional, as you're kind of putting this together. I'm visualizing this as I kind of go through here too. But it's really up to you how you do it, but it'll help you kind of really frame this. 5 or 6 sources might be a really good way to go with this. And your instructor might say otherwise. Your instructor might actually say that she or he wants a specific amount or whatever. But typically if they don't, this is kind of a good way to look at it. Okay? And see how important it is and how much easier it'll be for your sources to find what's the right sources and the right integration of sources when you really know that thesis statement. So if you're questioning the thesis statement, if you really don't feel strong, this is where you really need to go back and make sure it's as strong as it can be before you move forward. When your case number 9, make sure the essay is in correct formatted APA or MLA. Okay, title page, in-text citations, works cited, reference pages at the very end. Use your resources carefully. Okay, if you're coming here from another course, some history course, then same thing applies. If you're using Turabian, the Chicago style, it's all the same. And in some cases it really is. Research, good research is good research. It's just a matter of what formatting you're using. The method of how you go to do research is the same. How you might use a paraphrase or a direct quote or even a block quotation. Those are like your main ways of using research. Okay, so again, maybe visualize this as you go through. And then when you're case number 10, align all of this to the rubric. Use the rubric as a checklist to organize your writing and get to the best score possible. Instructors use the rubric to grade you. Be aware of each section and what it's worth. This might sound obvious on one level too, but it can be very empowering, because this rubric is really where your score is going to come. So be aware of everything on it. You know, if you look at it, the introduction is broken up, and the overview information has a certain amount of points. The thesis has a certain amount of points that it's worth, and the body paragraphs, you know, have a certain amount. So really look at that, and what that's also doing is it's putting you on top of your assignment. Use that as a checklist to kind of go along with what we have here, if any of this works, and then just move with that. And the thesis, and it will help you organize it too, because it's broken up in such a way that it serves as kind of its own outline for you. Okay. And this is questions, and obviously this is a recording, so I can't interact with anybody. But this is where we would stop at the end of a live session and interact with people. So yeah, once again, think again about this. If you're accessing this and just listening to it now, you know, maybe think about looking up to see what a live workshop is. It's always really good to get different perspectives. I've actually had students that have done recordings, and then they come to a workshop already with this background. So having a little bit of a prior knowledge can be very empowering, and it can actually help you, frame your writing and improve as you move forward. But so that's it, and thank you all for listening. Remember that we are here at the Online Writing Center to assist you. Working with students is what we do and what we specialize in, what we love doing. And we've got 12 coaches here as of right now, and that's always kind of changing as the university changes and all that stuff too. But look us up, Online Writing Center. We work with you one-on-one for 30-minute sessions for any assignment, even brainstorming. We do a bunch of these workshops live, and then we as many things as possible. We have these recordings, as extra resources to kind of put all that stuff together. So, happy writing, good luck with your assignment moving forward, and feel free to contact us to assist you further. Okay? Take care. Thanks.